we have one more session before lunch, and that is with Matthew Wicks, who is the Vice President of Strategy and Organizational Development for the International Association of K-12 Online Learning. He is the founder of the Illinois Virtual Public High School. He was the Chief Information Officer of the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy, the Associate Department Head of the Computing Division at Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory as well. He's also worked on the Keeping Pace research publication, nationally recognized publication on digital learning from 2004 to 2008. And then in 2009, he actually joined the research and writing team for that same publication. So thank you all very much, and Matthew Wicks.
Well, thank you, Paul. And I have the couple of motivations to make sure we get through this quickly. One is that lunch is next, and people always know that. The other is the organizers of this event know that I almost didn't make it because 2 days ago I woke up in excruciating pain with my back. I had severe muscle back spasms, and I'm a lot better, but I'm still in a fair amount of pain. And as soon as I'm done presenting, I can take my pain medicine. I didn't want to do that beforehand so that I would still be aware enough to give a presentation. So I have that personal motivation. They told you a little bit about me in the introduction, and you can read that, so I'm not going to go in too much details. I don't think you have the slides in front of you, but I assume they will be made available in the same way, and I'm going to be around the rest of the day as well, and I have cards, and I can get email addresses to send things out. If you're trying to figure out how iNACOL stands for the International Association for K-12 Online Learning, give up, it doesn't, and if you're really interested in the story, you can find me later and ask about that. But just a little bit about our organization. You know, online learning at the K-12 level is fairly new, and we were founded in 2003, and we are a nonprofit, a member-based organization, but as opposed to a lot of other member-based organizations that are like industry associations, we have a very diverse membership basis. Individual teachers and principals and administrators are our members, school districts are our members, online programs are our members, for-profit companies that are involved in K-12 online learning are members, state departments of education, university researchers. Basically, anyone that is interested in the topic in the field of K-12 online learning comes to us for their membership, and we, as opposed to advocating for any specific group, we view that we advocate for children for what is going to be the best opportunities for their education. We do hold an annual conference every year if you're interested in online learning. It's a great opportunity to come to that. We also, on our website, have a lot of research publications, some that we've written, some that are from other people that provide a lot of other information. I'm having the same problem as some of the other speakers. So one of the things that was mentioned in the introduction is the Keeping Pace publication. This is the publication that comes out yearly. It's while it's not an iNACOL publication, it is released at our conference. And it goes and looks at each state, state by state, and looks at what's happening policy-wise and what's happening practice-wise in the state. So if you're wanting to see resources of what's happening around the country, and later on in the presentation I'll talk about what is going on in Kansas, but this gives you an opportunity to see different approaches. Let's go backwards. And so these next couple of maps are from that 2010 version of the publication, 2011. And this map is what's talking about multi-district full-time online schools. In other words, a student that instead of going to a traditional school is going to school online full-time. And by multi-district, this means that these aren't just a school that's been created in one district that can serve students from these districts. In general, they tend to be statewide. They are drawing students from across the state that are completing their education with real teachers, but they're doing it in an online environment. In a minute, I'm going to get to some of this. And so you can see that a fair amount of states, and it's about half of the states, a little bit over half, have these policies that make that possible. In the vast majority of cases, these are charter schools, not universally true. In the vast majority of cases, these full-time online schools are charter schools. Another way that online learning has been organized, and kind of started this way, is in a statewide program. I mentioned I was a co-founder of the Illinois Virtual High School. That was a statewide, and it's known as a supplemental program. In other words, the students continue to be students in their school district or their private school, or if they're homeschooled, they continue that as their primary form of educational placement, but they supplement their education by taking normally one, it could be more than one, course online. And so this might be because that course isn't offered at that school. It's a small school district, they don't offer AP courses. They might take AP courses online. School district only offers Spanish, but I'd like to take German. I take German online. It might be because there's a scheduling conflict. I remember in the first year of operation, the Illinois Virtual High School, we had a student come to us from New Trier High School, which is the wealthiest and most respected school district in the state. And we thought that was the last place that we were going to find a student, because we were there to kind of equalize the opportunity for students. Well, the reason why she came to us is that she had been in band throughout her school life, and band was the same period as advanced placement physics. And she was being forced with a choice between those two courses. And how do you do a trade-off between two vastly different subjects? Well, band isn't something that works real well online, but AP Physics does. And so she took AP Physics with us, was able to continue on with band. So you can see some of the U.S. online learning facts. And one of the things that, the main thing that I want to communicate here is how quickly it has been growing. When I got involved with the K-12 online learning world in 1999-2000, there were about 50,000 enrollments nationwide. Today there are 4 million enrollments nationwide. Still a relatively very small percentage of the overall student population, but something that is growing. And that you can see that a high percentage of districts at least have some of their students involved with online learning. You're seeing that more and more states are beginning to require online learning as a means of as a graduation requirement for high school. And literally, I updated the slide this week because earlier this week, Idaho became the 4th state, and theirs is actually the strongest graduation requirement with online learning. One of the things when I was first out speaking about it, people say, well, can we all agree that online learning isn't for everyone? And I said, absolutely, I have no problem with that. Now can we agree to something else? Can we all agree that classroom learning isn't for everyone? And they kind of take me back. It's like, well, if you don't believe every student is best served in an online environment, for some students that just isn't the way they learn, well then why would you believe that there wouldn't be some students that just don't learn well in the traditional classroom environment? So all of that, what we're doing is to try to provide that choice. So I'm going to go through some of the big myths of online learning. The first one is that online learning is just a high-tech version of a correspondence course. You're just doing it independently, there's no interaction. Furthest thing from the truth. Quality online learning has a teacher that you're interacting with online, you're interacting with other students online. If you think of the generation of students today, that is completely natural. While it might seem to you odd as that is a way of interacting, it isn't, second nature, it's completely second nature to them. I remember a conversation I had with my daughter a couple years ago, who is now a sophomore in college, and I was having some problems with my cell phone. It was dropping calls, and I was trying to determine, was it my phone, or was it the plan, or was it the area? And so I asked her, if she was having any problems with her cell phone making calls. And she goes, well, Dad, I haven't used my phone to make a call in a couple of weeks. I text all the time. And so it's just a totally different attitude on how communication happens. Another myth, and this is where you really will hear it as people that are opposing online learning, that somehow online learning is trying to replace teachers with computers. And so that when you're online, all you're doing is sitting in front of a computer. That's no more true than a student in a traditional school that's saying that the only thing that they're working on their education is when they're in their traditional classroom, when they're in their classroom, you know, as if homework didn't exist, that there weren't other things that you were doing, that even within the classroom, the lecture was the only way that counted. Already talked about online learning, people essentially saying that it's teacherless. Again, you can find programs like that, but they're not really online learning. That's computer-aided instruction. That's drill and kill, and that might have a benefit for a very specific application, but in general, that's not what online learning is. Often people will say, oh, well, online learning, that's just easy to pass because, again, somehow these courses aren't real. And that's the biggest thing that students find, and they will almost universally say when you survey them afterwards about what their expectations were of the difficulty of the course and what it really was, that they almost always say, oh, it was not only was it much harder than I expected, it was actually more challenging than most traditional courses that I've taken. A big myth is that online learning is basically only good for pick your type of student. It can only be used for that highly motivated advanced student. Or conversely, people will say, no, it's only good for those students that need remedial instruction. The reality is that if you customize the program for the type of student, it can work for any type of student. You can't do it in the same approach for every type of student, in the same way that when you bring students in the classroom, if there's only one type of teaching approach, that's only going to work for a certain percentage of students. Another myth, and since a lot of this conversation is about the cost, is there's a myth that online learning is significantly less expensive than traditional instruction. And that kind of gets built into the feeling that online learning is teacherless. So if you're not going to have to pay these people to teach, well then of course it's going to be a lot less expensive. Online learning in general is less expensive, but it isn't like you're going to, save 90%. Where it's especially, though, less expensive is where it allows things that were previously economically unviable. For example, you're in a small school district. You have 4 students that are interested in taking calculus. Does that school offer that course? In the vast majority of the cases, the answer is no. If they are, it's extremely expensive to offer. But if you had 6 districts that had those 4 students and put them in an online course, and so now you have one teacher who's now teaching 25 students, you've now created a situation that is economically viable. It's an efficient way to allocate teacher expertise across a larger geographical area. Then finally, the online students are going to be isolated from their peers, that where they're not going to be prepared to interact socially and succeed in society in that way. This is most often targeted at full-time online programs. I mean, if you're in a supplemental online program, those students are in the regular school the majority of the time, so they're obviously interacting. But even when you're in a full-time online program, most full-time online programs have field trips, have other ways where you're physically interacting. It also presumes that somehow school is the only way that kids are able to interact with people, as if they can't have sports teams or be in Cub Scouts or Girl Scouts or be in their church activities or the myriad of other community activities. There have been online programs that have proms and still come together. So there are a wide variety of ways, and there's a specific publication on our website about socialization. So really the challenge for education in general, not for online learning, is do all students have access to a world-class education? And what can we do to personalize the education environment so that all students can have access? So our vision is that all students have the opportunity to take a quality online learning course, whether that be in a supplemental or in a full-time. In other words, that opportunity exists, and that is the best option for them, that it exists out there. And so in this graph you can see it's a wide variety. Credit recovery, for example, is a huge growing aspect of the online learning mode. Credit recovery basically refers to when a student has taken a course, wasn't successful in earning credit, and is now going back and repeating that. What's been the traditional approach? Well, you throw them to summer school, or they take it again the next year. Well, they might be successful the second time. It might be that they just weren't getting things as quickly as other students. But often, maybe that was just a bad match. And if they failed the first time, what makes you think if doing it exactly the same way is going to help them succeed the second time? Online learning can provide that opportunity to say, we're going to do it in a different approach. And in some of the most progressive areas, especially in courses that are very sequential in nature, like, say, algebra, if you are doing poorly in the first 2 months of algebra, well, that's almost guaranteed that you're going to fail the course, because if you didn't understand those base concepts that you have to apply to Unit 2 and Unit 3 and Unit 4, then you're out of luck. And especially, it's like, okay, so you failed the first semester of Algebra 1, well, what are you going to do now? Take the second semester of Algebra 1? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So there's a lot of progressive environments where a student, it can be caught up front, maybe in 4 weeks, say, this student isn't getting it. Let's put them in a different manner. Or at least, if after a semester, let's not put them in the second semester of Algebra 1. Let's have them go online and take the first semester of Algebra 1 during that second period. Maybe during the summer, they could take an online class for the second semester and be back on track. So, as I say, what does opportunity look like? It means having all students having that option, that there are programs that exist, whether they be full-time or supplemental, that students have. And I really want to emphasize the quality aspect. iNACOL has developed and published 3 voluntary standards of quality. We started with quality online courses. What does it mean for that course to be online? Then our second standard was on quality online teaching. What does it mean to be a good online teacher? And then our third standard was on what is a quality online program? How do you put that all together? Those were released in 2007, 2008, and 2009. And we, either next month or in November, we will be releasing revised versions of the online course and the online teaching standards that are based on what has been learned over those past several years. So, simply putting something online and doing it the same way as we're doing now, even if you give them access, what good is that? So now you have online mediocrity as opposed to in-person mediocrity. Haven't really gained anything. Okay, maybe it ended up being a little expensive, so we paid less for mediocrity. But no one's goal is mediocrity. Our goal is to have students that are proficient, that are excelling. So it's really important to us that it isn't just about getting that opportunity, but that quality opportunity. So early on, and when you say early on, that means like 10 years ago, all the activity in K-12 online learning was either in those statewide programs or those full-time programs that were charter schools. But what you have seen over the past 3 or 4 years is a much higher emphasis on individual districts having their online programs. And this is another chart from the Teaching Pace that is just showing some examples of some major district-wide programs. And where it's happening in districts, there's another term in addition to online learning called blended learning. Sometimes you'll refer to it as hybrid learning, but we prefer the term blended learning. In this publication that came out earlier this year by the Insight Institute was specifically about blended learning. Blending the online instruction and the face-to-face instruction, having a combination. If you're thinking about it at a school district, that makes lots and lots of sense because you already have these students coming together. And so you can kind of do the best of both worlds. You can have certain things. One of the things that has been coming out is what's known as the flipped classroom. As opposed to lecturing in the classroom and then sending students to do what we consider homework, you could have the students watch a lecture via video at homework and come into the classroom and have in-depth small group discussions or hands-on activities. So that's one example of a blended learning environment where they're doing some things online and some things face-to-face. And I don't have time to go into this, but Michael Horn and Heather Staker, who developed 6 models of online learning. There's actually, to be honest, there's a lot of discussion and controversy. Are these the right ways of describing them? But before they did it, no one had even made an attempt. And I've had many conversations with Michael Horn, and he agrees that these probably aren't quite right, but it's a good place for discussion. But there are a variety of ways of approaching this, and in that publication, then they did case studies of 40 different schools in those different models. So it's a great way to learn about what is happening. But whether it be full-time online learning or blended learning, the key to this and why we believe as an organization that is so powerful for improving educational outcomes and giving choice is that opportunity for personalization. And that isn't exactly something new, right? Teachers have always been told, try to differentiate instruction, teach differently for each student. But if you're in a traditional classroom and you have 30 students in there, you only have so much time, and there's only so much personalization that is, that you're capable of doing. And this isn't a criticism against teachers. I come from a family of educators. I'm married to a high school teacher. Teachers do a fantastic job, but there's a limit to how much you can personalize when you're meeting with them all in a large group. And so online learning, because so much of that interaction is individual, allows for that personalization. The technology can support that teacher in a personalization. Some of the programs come out. New York City Public Schools has what they call School of One that they're piloting in the middle school. And the concept is that each student really has their own personalized curriculum path, and that is supported by the technology because they can get regular feedback and they can see, oh, well, after this week, Johnny got this concept, Jane kind of got it, and Jimmy, doesn't have a clue. Well, then these 3 students can then be given different pathways through the curriculum so that they can reinforce it for the one that doesn't know what's going on, and the person that got it can go on and go forward. So there's a variety of ways of looking at different assessments, different presentations. You can present in so many different ways on online because you have to have accumulated that entire course. You can say for that visual learner, this is the way that you go, this is how you go through the content. For that auditory learner, no, don't choose these assignments, go to this, and you can allow students to choose on their own as you're developing and understanding which learning styles work best for them. And probably the biggest form of personalization is what is known as competency-based pathways. And competency-based pathways is basically turning the world upside down. Right now in the traditional school, you have 180 days or whatever it is in your school, and the assumption is that end of that 180 days, all the students will have learned and be ready to move on. Well, common sense tells us that students learn at different paces. Individuals learn at different paces and in different subjects. I was pretty good at math. I caught on with math real quickly. I didn't really care much for social studies at the time. I probably would have benefited from spending more time in social studies. So with a competency-based approach, students can be at different places in different courses. And often people will associate competency-based learning is simply getting rid of the Carnegie unit, which is defining X number of hours of instruction. And that is part of it, but it's really much more than that. So there's really 3 items that are core to something being competency-based. The students proceeding and going through upon mastery and proficiency. So that's the first thing. They have to demonstrate mastery of the content before they move on. And in order to make that possible, you have to be very explicit and measurable in those learning objectives. Those have to be very transparent. The student and the teacher needs to know this is what it means to have mastered Algebra 1, and not the whole course, but this is what it means to have mastered this specific portion of the course, so that everyone knows up front, and then in that assessment that is meaningful and realized in multiple ways. Not just one time did the students show that they got this concept, because they might have gotten that by accident. But that multiple times in multiple ways they have shown that they understand that concept. And the key then gets into this, just in real estate, location, location, location. In competency-based learning, it's assessments, assessments, assessments. Those have to be valid, they have to be reliable, they have to match directly to what has been determined before the course ever started of what it means to learn that specific subject. Changing focus just a little bit on what are some of the relevant policies as far as enabling online learning in any state. The biggest one is the seat time, that the way that you determine the funding is the student having been in the seat a specific amount of time. Just as I was just talking about the competency-based learning, you can see how that's anathema to that, because students are going to advance in different ways. But if you just think about online learning, what does it mean to be in the seat? Is it just to try to apply attendance policies that make lots of sense for a physical classroom don't necessarily make sense for an online classroom? It's just not the number of minutes you're online. First of all, that can be so easily gained if you want to. You go online, you stay online. Oh, I've been online for 300 minutes. Of course, I got online and then I watched TV. So I mean, you need to really look and base it on the student having shown that they have mastered the concept. Another huge area has to do with line of sight. That many states, in order to be counted as a student, you have to be in the physical supervision of an adult for that school district. Again, with online learning, that doesn't necessarily make sense. This isn't to say that we shouldn't have adults interacting, there shouldn't be supervision, but you have to think of new ways of doing things. Open enrollment is another key aspect of policy that makes certain online learning environments work. If you think back to one of the first maps that I showed of the states that had full-time online learning opportunities and all those areas in white, I can tell you with certainty that if not 100%, probably 98% of those states don't have open enrollment laws, which means that if you even started a charter school, well, you can only serve the students from your district. And what makes online learning work efficiently is that ability to amass people from a larger geographical area, so that you are now, because these are, not everyone's going to be interested in doing this. There's only going to be a small percentage in community one. You have to have the ability to amass over a large area. And the final area is in what I term FTE slicing. Most schools are funded, most school formulas are based on full-time equivalent. A student, being, how many full-time students you have. And I'm from Illinois, you can either be considered a half-time student or a full-time student. But what if you're taking 5 courses in your regular school and 1 course online? what does that mean? Where should that funding go? So if you slice what the funding is down to the course level, now you have the ability to say, okay, well, the local school should be getting 5/6 of the funding, and that online program or whatever gets 1/6. Now that's a gross oversimplification of it, but it's the basis for doing it, because you still need to account for the fact that that place where that student is physically going has certain responsibilities for that student, even if now they're taking the online course. So it isn't quite that simple, but it's based on that concept. So just to talk about where Kansas is compared to the rest of the state, if you looked at that map, Kansas was colored in on the full-time options and was white in the statewide virtual program. And the fact that you're white on the statewide virtual program is kind of neither here nor there. I mean, that just, some states have found that that's a great way of serving the students. Minnesota is one of the best states in the policy environment, and they don't have a statewide program because they have come up with a system that makes it possible for lots of individual districts to serve students and districts to serve across district boundaries, so it works just as well for them. But Kansas has a very detailed process and procedures of what it means to start an online program that ensures quality, it talks about the type of staffing that they need to have, and once you become a certified online program in Kansas, that you can serve students in your district or other districts. And so they have 47 different online programs that have been recognized by the Kansas Department of Education, and they're built into those different types of grouping. So ranging from those full-time schools to individual programs within districts or buildings. One area, though, that I think Kansas is really weak is on the way they determine that funding for an online program. They do this on this 2-day census count. And it's really, when you read on it, it's really complicated. But basically, you have to have identified that the student was in attendance 2 days between the beginning of school and early October. Is that really what we want to think of how you determine this kind of? So a student that arrived in your school on October 5th, wasn't in attendance, you shouldn't get funding for them. So it creates really perverse incentives for an online program to try to get as many people in. By that time, it's like, oh, well, it's October 5th. If you want to drop out of our program now, fine. You've already been in our county. So you really, that's an area where I think Kansas could improve. But they've done well as far as determining the funding for that full time. They've set it at 105% of the base rate, and maybe the base rate has changed since I looked at the statistic. That's still kind of on a low level as far as overall funding, and one of the challenges that often happens with these full-time virtual schools, but especially statewide, is they have access to the state portion of the funding, but they don't have access to the local dollars of the funding, so they really aren't, it's not on equal footings. But they have part of that funding formula for some additional money if they're helping at-risk students for advanced placement courses. So overall, they're doing fairly well. And I think that was the last, yes, that was my last slide, so I'm happy to take questions.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. You had mentioned that Idaho has the strongest requirements for graduation. Did I understand that they are required to take an online course to graduate?
They're actually required to take 2 online classes to graduate from high school. Now this was just put in place this week, Monday or Tuesday. A little bit of history. The legislature passed a law this session giving some general guidance, but essentially set up a commission that was to work out the details, and the commission finally worked out the details. So I don't know what year it starts with, but they will have to take 2 online courses to graduate. Florida requires one online course to graduate, but it can be done anywhere between 6th and 12th. In the other two states, Alabama and Michigan, Michigan was the first, they termed this as an online learning experience. And then you have to say, well, what does that mean? And so you can meet that in a little bit less stringent way than taking an entire course online.
Then my second question is, you had said that online teaching does not eliminate teachers' jobs. Is that because with only 5 students, the teacher position wouldn't have existed anyway, or is that?
Yeah, well, I meant it in a couple ways. But first of all, that an online course has a teacher associated with it. It isn't these students just learning the content on their own on the computer and then taking a test. They are interacting with the teacher. That's how I meant it more so than anything else. Whether it eliminates any teaching jobs in a macro sense, that's hard to determine. In some ways you could say that it could increase jobs because you're now creating opportunities that didn't exist. But there's also, as you look at the different blended learning environments, sometimes it's different roles and so the type of work that they're doing. But the main emphasis I want to make is there's still a very human component involved with online learning.
Also want to thank you for being here. Very strong presentation. Appreciate that a lot. I have an observation that's very specific to our situation. I want to know if it can be generalized or not. We have hundreds of kids taking online courses. What we found is they're not taking online courses to graduate early, 3 years or 3.5 years, but what they're doing is taking online courses as freshmen and sophomores to clear their schedule so they can take more electives, so that they can take more advanced placement courses, they can get on our Center for Advanced Professional Studies program, on and on and on. So they're far, far exceeding graduation requirements, taking many more courses. Can you generalize that?
That is a very common use, at least for your advanced, your college-bound students. And so, especially like in Illinois, for example, consumer education, we don't have real strong statewide requirements, but one of the few things is that you have to take a consumer education course to graduate from high school. A lot of students will take that online so that then they can take something that they're more interested in. It also, though, opens up the possibility that maybe you can have dual credit programs in place so these students can graduate with maybe enough credits that they're essentially equivalent to a sophomore in college, which can be huge.
Thankfully, we do have those programs, and that's exactly what I'm referring to. Lots of kids now graduating with 30 college credits and becoming sophomores, and I think the online courses have really accelerated that opportunity for kids. It's really been a positive. I just might comment, too, in terms of numbers of teachers and teachers losing jobs, and here again, I have a very micro view of this, but that's not happened with us at all. In fact, we have teachers now that are making extra money because they have to teach their normal course load and then they take an extra online class on their own hours, on off hours, and we pay them. So it's really creating more opportunities than it is eliminating.
Right. To go along with that, it also can open up the opportunity for certain people that if your only option is to teach in a traditional manner, it's not going to work for them. Some specific examples. Parents with young children, more often the mother, but it could be the father, that their children in their preschool years, they would like to be home with their children, but because there's so much more flexibility in time, and they might not be interested in working full-time, but they could teach several online courses. Teachers ready for retirement. Another huge opportunity, and so an opportunity, we're going to be in a crisis soon where we're not going to have enough teachers, and so you can retain these quality, experienced teachers, and again, they're not interested in working full-time any longer, but they can work in a part-time environment and give those opportunities.
We have that as well. I totally agree with you. Make one political comment. I want the legislators in the room to smile, okay? And it's simply that when we do have these kids that are taking a 1.2 load or a 1.4 load because they can do it and it's online, it would be nice to have funding to be able seriously to reinforce that. with the district and get a 1.2. Right now we're capped at a 1.0 funding. We do have the FTE funding, which is great, as you mentioned, but if we could, in those specific instances, it could be recognized that we have kids that are going above and beyond and get the extra funding, that would also be helpful. And with that, I'll shut up.
In Kansas and many other states, there are vast areas that are sparsely populated. And we bus students for hours in the morning and hours again in the afternoon to take them to and from the schools. Would it be appropriate, instead of having these massive school districts that are for one sole county, to instead go back to the one-room schoolhouse in the local town where students can meet with one, maybe two teachers, and take the bulk of their courses online?
It absolutely can be used that way. In fact, rural education is probably the impetus for a lot of this. And you asked the question slightly different, but I know in Illinois there were small school districts that came up to me saying the reason why we haven't had to consolidate is because the Illinois Virtual High School exists. Because now we can expand those offerings. We can keep our local community schools. So this is before that they've had to consolidate and have these things. And we're now being able to give them the opportunities that would have been available at a larger school. Also, even if you are doing this busing, there have been some school districts that are initiating a program that on their school buses, they're making them mobile hotspots. And so that they can work on their laptop or the device that can actually be learning time.
Pass it out.
Other questions? Well, again, thank you very much. It was my honor to be here today.
Now we've got a good little break for you guys to stand.